2 hours after burying my 8-year-old son, my phone rang with a call that changed my life forever. His teacher's trembling voice could barely hold itself together as she told me, "Ma'am, I've found something you have to see with your own eyes. Come to the school right now and meet me in the staff room. Don't tell your family or anyone else. This is dangerous." So, when I finally reached the school, the figure I saw in front of the door made me shudder from head to toe. I would have never imagined that the person who had the teacher cornered in there was my own husband. But before we get to that moment, let me start from the beginning. And as the host of my favorite storytelling channel always says, before the story begins, write in the comments what city you're listening from, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so this story can reach more people. 2 hours after burying my son Ethan, the house felt like a frozen hell. The overpowering scent of funeral flowers and wreaths mingled with the aroma of damp earth clinging to the hem of my black dress. People kept coming and going from the living room, murmuring words of condolence that sounded hollow and distant, as if spoken from the end of a tunnel. They said I had to accept God's will, that Ethan was at peace in heaven, but none of those phrases could soothe the pain that was tearing my chest apart, as if someone were clawing at it from the inside. Ethan was only 8 years old. He was a healthy, restless child, always running from one place to another with an energy that was contagious to everyone. The doctor had said it was a sudden, massive heart attack, an extremely rare case, an anomaly. I didn't believe it, but I didn't have the strength to argue. I took refuge in my room, sat in a corner of the bed, and stared at the picture frame where Ethan was smiling proudly, holding a trophy from a school race. Outside, my husband Marcus received and saw off visitors with red eyes, a swollen face and slumped shoulders, as if he carried the weight of the world on his back. Everyone praised Marcus's strength. They said he was an exemplary husband and an admirable father, who was only staying on his feet to support his shattered wife. Through the slightly ajar bedroom door, I saw him hugging Mr. Sterling, the president of the foundation where Ethan studied. The older man patted his back firmly, offering comfort like a father consoles a son. That scene should have touched me, but something in my stomach churned. A wave of nausea I couldn't explain. That's when my phone, resting on the bedspread, began to vibrate. The lit screen showed the name of Ms. Evans, Ethan's teacher. I frowned. Why would she be calling at a time like this? She had been at the funeral. I had seen her crying by the casket myself. With a trembling hand, I slid my finger over the green button and brought the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end was so low it sounded like a whisper choked with fear. "Ms." Evans's breathing was ragged, as if she were hiding in a dark closet. She asked me to listen carefully, that she couldn't repeat what she was about to say. She said she had found something I needed to see with my own eyes, something left behind in the drawer of Ethan's desk. Her voice broke as she begged me to come to the school immediately and wait for her in the staff room. She stressed one condition that made my blood run cold. I shouldn't tell anyone, not even my family. She repeated that it was dangerous, that I couldn't trust anyone but her. I felt my heart begin to pound uncontrollably. The grief that had paralyzed me suddenly transformed into a sharp alert that pierced through the fog of pain. There was something urgent, something dark related to my son. I felt it in the way Ms. Evans was breathing on the other end of the line, in the restrained desperation of her words. My mother's instinct, which until then had only met a wall of helplessness in the face of death, ignited with brutal clarity. I wiped away my tears with a swipe of my hand, forced myself to stand up, and took a deep breath. I had to go. I had to know what was so dangerous that she had found. I left the room dragging my feet, feigning an even deeper exhaustion than what I truly felt. I approached Marcus, who was still talking with Mr. Sterling on the patio. I whispered to him that my head was hurting badly, that I needed to go to the corner store to get my migraine medication because I had left it in the car, and to get some fresh air. Marcus looked at me with a tenderness that would have convinced anyone. He offered to go in my place, but I gently refused, telling him I needed 15 minutes alone to clear my head. Mr. Sterling smiled, recommending I not be long, that the night breeze wasn't good for someone so frail. I agreed with a nod and headed for my car. As I drove to Ethan's school, the city seemed to stretch on forever. A fine drizzle began to fall, making the asphalt shine with the yellowish reflections of the streetlights. My mind was a whirlwind. What had Ms. Evans found? Why was she so scared? And why did she forbid me from talking to Marcus? Until that moment, he had been an exemplary father, attentive, patient, dedicated. I told myself over and over that he couldn't be connected to anything dangerous. However, a small seed of doubt began to sprout, slow and stubborn, like the roots of a plant breaking through concrete. Scenes from the last few months that I hadn't wanted to look at too closely came to mind. Ethan's stomach pains, his sudden fatigue, the afternoons he would fall asleep in any corner. I remembered how Marcus insisted on personally handling his medications, and how he would get angry when I suggested taking the boy to another doctor, not the family doctor, that distant cousin of Mr. Sterling who, according to them, knew Ethan's history better than anyone. All of that, which had been just background noise until then, began to align in my memory like pieces of a sinister puzzle. The school looked eerie at night. The main gate was ajar as if someone had left it that way on purpose. I didn't see the guard in his booth. Maybe he was on his rounds, or maybe there was no night duty because classes were suspended after Ethan's death. I parked the car far away under the shadow of a huge tree, so no one would recognize the vehicle from the street. I ran across the courtyard under the drizzle with my heart pounding in my throat and headed for the building where the staff room was on the second floor. The hallway on that floor was completely dark, lit only by the faint light coming up from the outdoor gardens. However, I could make out a sliver of light escaping from under the staff room door. It was open a few inches. Ms. Evans had to be inside. I quickened my pace, but the closer I got, the more oppressive the air became. My whole body was telling me something was wrong. The silence was so thick that the only sound was my footsteps amplified by the tiles. I remembered Ethan's voice, telling me how kind Ms. Evans was, how much he loved her. If she had reached this level of fear, it had to be something very serious. I stopped in front of the ajar door and held my breath before looking inside. What I saw froze my heart. Ms. Evans was cornered in a corner by the filing cabinet. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror, and her whole body was trembling like a leaf. She held her hands up in a gesture of supplication, as if begging for mercy. In front of her, with his back to me, stood a man in a black shirt I knew all too well. His posture, the way he rested his weight on one leg, even the faint scent of his cologne that drifted into the hallway, were unbearably familiar. The man held a small black object in his hand, a device that looked like a USB drive or a portable disk. He spoke to Ms. Evans in a low tone, laden with threat, a cold, sharp voice without a hint of affection. It was a voice so different from the one I heard every day at home that for a second I refused to believe it. I pushed the door gently. The hinges creaked, giving me away. The man spun around, alert, and the white neon light fully illuminated his face. My legs gave way, and I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. It was Marcus, my husband, the father of my newly buried son. Marcus looked at me without surprise, as if he had calculated from the beginning the possibility of me showing up. His expression, which a moment before had been pure ice, slowly transformed into a mask of restrained grief, the same one he had worn all day in front of family and friends. He concealed the black device by sliding it to his side, trying to hide it from my sight. I looked at Ms. Evans, who was now crying silently, her lips trembling, and her hands still raised. My mind refused to understand. Marcus was supposed to be at home, receiving people, mourning with me. What was he doing here? Why was he threatening our son's teacher? What was on that device that was so important? The silence became suffocating. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and Ms. Evans's faint, choked sobs. Marcus broke the tension by approaching me with a calm stride, like someone approaching a frightened animal to soothe it. His face changed again, becoming that of a fragile husband broken by grief. He opened his arms as if to hug me and said in a hoarse voice that he didn't expect me to come to the school. That he had only come because he couldn't bear to be at home surrounded by memories of Ethan. He claimed he had come to collect our son's things, that he wanted to put them away before the cleaning staff emptied the desks the next day. His explanation sounded reasonable, almost touching, and if I hadn't seen the scene from seconds before, I would have collapsed into his arms without questioning anything. But the memory of Ms. Evans, cornered with fear in her eyes, was still seared into my brain. I sought the teacher's gaze. I needed confirmation, a sliver of truth amidst so many lies. Ms. Evans was trembling. Her eyes darted from Marcus to me as if she were at a deadly crossroads. When Marcus glanced at her with that threatening glint I had never seen before, she quickly nodded. In a broken voice, she confirmed his version. Yes, Marcus had come to get Ethan's things, and they were just reminiscing about what a good boy he had been. I knew she was lying. The cold sweat running down her temple, the way her fingers clenched the hem of her skirt until they turned white, gave her away. Marcus slid his arm around my shoulders and squeezed too tightly, with a painful insistence. He said we should go home, that it wasn't good for me to be in a place that only reopened the wound. On the table was a cardboard box with drawings, notebooks, and some of Ethan's pencils. With an almost imperceptible gesture, Marcus slipped the small black object into his pants pocket. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I saw it clearly. Before we left, he walked toward the door first. In that brief moment, Ms. Evans rushed towards me. She pretended to fix my scarf, which was a bit crooked from the rain, and her icy fingers brushed against my neck. I felt her slide something into the fold of the fabric at my shoulder. Her eyes locked with mine. In them, I saw a desperate plea and an urgent warning. Her lips moved without making a sound, but I could clearly read the words she mouthed. Run. My heart raced. I forced myself to appear calm. I nodded as if thanking her for the gesture and took a step back. Marcus turned, watching us with some suspicion. He asked what we were saying. I quickly replied that Ms. Evans was just telling me to be strong, to pray, and to take care of my health. He seemed convinced. He took my hand and we left the room, leaving Ms. Evans behind, alone in the middle of that silent room, rigid as a wax statue about to melt from the heat of fear. The car ride back was a journey to an invisible execution. Marcus drove with a studied calm, wiping his eyes from time to time like someone drying tears. He put on classical music at a low volume, the same he used to listen to when he wanted to relax, but to me, it sounded like the funeral march of my own destiny. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the rain beat harder and harder against the window. I could feel the folded paper in the crease of my scarf like a burning stone. I wanted to read it right there, but I was afraid Marcus would notice. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. The man I had been married to for 10 years suddenly seemed like a complete stranger. I went over the last few months in my mind again. Ethan's complaints of stomach pain, his sudden weakness, the long naps that weren't normal for a healthy child, and especially Marcus's insistence that only the family's trusted doctor could treat him. Something horrible was taking shape in my mind. When we got home, the atmosphere was calmer. Most of the mourners had left. Only a few relatives remained, collecting chairs in the yard. I said I felt dizzy and needed to lie down. Marcus offered to make me a hot tea, but I told him I just wanted to sleep. I went into the bedroom, locked the door, and leaned my back against it, trying to control my breathing. I waited until I heard his footsteps moving away toward the kitchen. Then, with trembling hands, I took out the small piece of paper hidden in my scarf. It was a sheet torn from a school notebook, with hasty, almost illegible handwriting. I read it under the dim light of the bedside lamp. Ethan didn't have a heart problem. They replaced his medicine with low doses of poison. Check the teddy bear in his room. He recorded something before he died. Be careful, your husband is dangerous. The world came crashing down on me all at once. My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor. My boy, my little Ethan, hadn't died from a mysterious illness. He had been poisoned, little by little, and the person who had done it was in my kitchen making tea, pretending to be a devastated father. The unbearable pain that had torn me apart until then transformed into something harder and sharper. Rage. My tears dried up instantly. I understood that crying could wait. What couldn't wait was the truth. I managed to get up and tiptoed out of the room, heading for Ethan's room, which was next to the master bedroom. I opened the door carefully. The scent of baby cologne and lotion still hung in the air, so familiar it made my heart ache. Everything was as he had left it. The building blocks on the floor, the superhero posters on the walls, the storybooks scattered on the nightstand. Sitting on the bed was his big brown teddy bear, the one he hugged every night to sleep, the gift I had given him for his birthday 2 years ago. I approached the bear and stroked its soft fur with trembling hands. I noticed something odd on its back. A slightly thick seam, as if someone had opened and closed it in a hurry with clumsy stitches. I remembered they had taught him to sew in school, and he sometimes practiced on his toys. I went to the desk, opened a drawer, and took out a nail clipper with a small metal file. I went back to the bear and began to carefully undo the stitches. Between the white fiber filling, a small digital recorder appeared, a spy toy my friend Justin had given him some time ago. Ethan loved to play detective. I felt a chill as I pressed the play button. Ethan's voice sounded weak and hoarse, very different from the cheerful one that used to fill the house. My tummy hurt again today after Dad gave me the red medicine. It tastes really bitter, not like the one Mom gives me. I'm scared to tell Mom. Dad gets angry like that other time. Dad says it's a super vitamin to make me strong, but I just feel worse every time. The audio continued with the sound of a door opening and heavy footsteps approaching. Then I clearly heard Marcus's voice talking on the phone with someone. His tone was calm, almost bored. Don't worry, Mr. Sterling. I've already increased the dose. The boy won't make it to next week. As soon as he dies, his grandfather's inheritance will be released to the guardian's account, which is mine. Then we'll split it 50-50 as we agreed. You just make sure the foundation's property deeds are ready for the name change. The recording cut off. The silence in the room became deafening. I covered my mouth with both hands to stifle a scream that was fighting to escape. Everything was spinning. My husband, the man with whom I had shared 10 years of my life, had poisoned our own son to get the inheritance money my father had left in Ethan's name. And the respectable Mr. Sterling, president of the Educational Foundation, was his accomplice. They were monsters, not men. Just then, the doorknob began to turn. Someone was trying to get in, but I had locked it. Claire. I heard Marcus's voice on the other side. Why is the door locked? Are you in there? Open it! His tone was no longer that of the sweet husband. There was harshness, suspicion, a veiled threat. He pounded on the door insistently. Open up, Claire. Don't make me break it down. I backed away, clutching the bear and the recorder to my chest. I was trapped. My son's killer was on the other side of the door, and most terrifyingly, he knew that I now knew his secret. The blows against the door became brutal. Each impact made the pictures on the wall vibrate. Marcus screamed my name with a voice distorted by rage and panic, a roar that mixed desperation and cruelty. I knew that as soon as he got in, my life would be hanging by a thread. Marcus was no longer my husband. He was a cornered animal, ready to destroy anything that could expose him. I tucked the recorder into the inner pocket of my dress, the only thing I now had to demand justice. I had to find another way out. The door was out of the question. Only the window remained. Ethan's room was on the second floor. I remembered the large oak tree that grew next to the house, its thick branches reaching close to the room's small balcony. I had scolded Ethan more than once for daring to climb it. Now that childhood mischief could save my life. I ran to the window, unlatched it with trembling hands, and threw it open. The night air, heavy with rain, hit my face like a bucket of ice water. Outside, the storm had intensified. Lightning illuminated the garden for seconds at a time. The thunder masked the sound of Marcus's blows on the door. The creaking of the wood warned me that the door wouldn't hold much longer. Without giving myself time to think, I climbed onto the balcony railing and felt for a tree branch with my foot. It was wet and slippery, but it was either that or die in there. I lunged, grabbing the branch with both hands. The rough bark scratched my palms, but I held on. My soaked dress got caught on a thin branch. I pulled with all my might until I heard the sound of fabric ripping. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was getting down. Just as my feet finally touched the muddy grass of the garden, I heard a loud crash from above. Marcus had broken down the bedroom door. I looked up and saw him in the doorway, bathed in the light from the room. He ran to the balcony and looked out, searching in the darkness, cursing loudly. I pressed myself against the tree trunk, holding my breath. A flash of lightning lit up the yard for a second. If he had looked down at that moment, he would have seen me. But the curtain of rain obscured his vision, and furious, he went back into the room, perhaps thinking I was still hiding there. I didn't waste a second. Barefoot, my feet sinking into the mud, I slipped along the side wall of the house and headed for the back garden gate, the one the gardener used. I knew that as soon as Marcus discovered I wasn't in the room, he would search the whole house and then come looking for me. I had to put as much distance as possible between us before he woke up the security guards or called any of his contacts. Mr. Sterling had friends everywhere. I no longer knew who I could trust. Every shadow seemed like an enemy. Every tree trunk, a lurking figure. With my heart racing and tears mixing with the rain on my face, I managed to open the small back gate and step out onto the dark path that ran behind the subdivision. There was no one there. I ran without looking back, the recorder clutched in my pocket, until I reached a main avenue about a mile away. My soaked phone vibrated several times in my pocket. I assumed it was Marcus. I refused to answer. I couldn't give him the slightest clue as to where I was. Taking shelter under the awning of a closed shop, panting, I pulled out my phone with fingers numb from the cold. I saw 10 missed calls from Marcus. I ignored them and searched for a name in my contact list. Justin, my best friend since high school, the only person I could trust. An investigative journalist, stubborn and used to dealing with dirty cases. I dialed his number with trembling hands, praying he wasn't asleep. It rang a couple of times, and then I heard his hoarse, sleepy voice. Claire, what happened? I couldn't give many explanations. With my voice broken by sobs, I barely managed to whisper, Justin, help me. Marcus killed Ethan. I'm near the gas station on the highway. Come get me. Don't ask any questions now. Just come quick. I hung up before he could react, and turned off the phone so no one could track my location. I huddled in a dark corner next to the shop's metal shutter, hugging my knees, shaking from fear and cold, hoping Justin would arrive before Marcus found me. 15 minutes felt like 15 years. Every set of car headlights that approached made my heart stop for a moment, expecting to see Marcus's black SUV. Finally, however, an old gray sedan pulled up in front of me. The passenger side window rolled down, and I saw Justin's worried face. I jumped up and got into the car without a word, slamming the door shut. I must have looked pitiful, soaked, covered in mud, a complete mess. My hands were scratched and my face as pale as a ghost. Justin gave me a quick glance. He understood it was serious and accelerated without asking questions. Inside the car, the contrast of the heater made me shiver even more. It wasn't just the cold, it was my body releasing the adrenaline. Justin passed me his jacket from the back seat and covered my shoulders. He drove with one hand while holding mine with the other, trying to convey calm. I started to tell him everything. From Ms. Evans's call, the scene at the school, Marcus's two faces, to the recording hidden in Ethan's bear. Every word was like spitting out broken glass. When I played the audio, he pulled the car over to the curb and listened intently, his face transforming as the words of Marcus and Mr. Sterling came out of the small device. When it finished, he slammed his fist on the steering wheel in rage, cursing Marcus and Sterling. Then he listened to the recording again, but this time with the cold mind of a journalist. He said it was strong evidence, but also very dangerous. Mr. Sterling was not just anybody. He had political influence, contacts in the police force, and surely expensive lawyers. If we just went to the local precinct, they could make the recorder disappear, or worse, silence us before we could even speak. He decided to take me to a safe place, a small apartment on the outskirts of the city that had belonged to his late uncle, a place not even his family knew he still used occasionally. That apartment would become our refuge and our operations center. On the way, Justin turned on the radio to break the oppressive silence. At first, there were traffic reports. Then the announcer interrupted with an urgent bulletin. The body of a woman has been found in the courtyard of an elementary school on Dove Street. The victim has been identified as a teacher. Initials R.E. The preliminary hypothesis points to a possible suicide, having thrown herself from the third floor of the school building. I felt the blood stop circulating. I started screaming inside the car. "Ms. Evans, they killed her," I sobbed. "Marcus and Mr. Sterling killed her, and now they're saying it was a suicide." Guilt lashed me with a violence worse than any physical blow. If I had gone earlier, if I had tried to get her out of the school with me, maybe she would still be alive. But I had left her there, alone with those monsters. I wept with my whole body, pounding the dashboard. Justin pulled over, turned off the engine, and hugged me tightly, letting me release that impossible pain. In the midst of my crying, something inside me changed. The pain stopped crushing me and hardened into a cold, sharp determination. My tears dried. I pulled away from Justin and looked at the dark road ahead. I remembered Ms. Evans's look when she whispered, "Run." She couldn't have died in vain. Neither could Ethan. It wasn't enough for Marcus and Sterling to go to jail. No, that would be too easy for them. They had to feel fear, helplessness, shame. They had to see their lives destroyed, just as they had destroyed mine. I looked at Justin with a new resolve. I told him with a calmness that scared even me that I didn't just want legal justice. I wanted to ruin those men's lives to the very root, to make them breathe the same terror they had forced upon Ethan and Ms. Evans. Justin held my gaze for a few seconds and nodded in silence, accepting this dark pact between us. We decided not to go to the police yet. First, we needed more evidence, something so conclusive that neither influence nor lawyers could tear it down. The recording alone could be dismissed as a setup. We needed to get the vial of poison Marcus had used on Ethan, the physical proof of the crime. We were sure he wouldn't destroy it immediately out of vanity, out of excessive confidence in his impunity, or simply out of carelessness. That night, in the small, dusty apartment, we ceased to be victims and became hunters. I cut my hair to my shoulders, threw away my torn black dress, and put on simple clothes that had belonged to Justin's uncle. The submissive Claire, the docile wife, had died with my son. It was just dawn when we sat down to plan my return to the snake pit, not as a repentant wife, but as a ghost come to unearth their secrets. We knew that Marcus worked as the director of operations at Mr. Sterling's Foundation corporate building. Every Friday, an external cleaning service did a deep clean of the offices. That would be my way in. Justin, an expert at getting into places he wasn't supposed to be, hacked the cleaning company's system and registered me on the temporary staff list under a false identity. He turned me into Sumi, a maintenance worker with a badge and uniform. In front of the apartment's bathroom mirror, I tied on a dark blue work scarf. The practical kind worn by women who work long hours, and put on the light blue uniform, slightly large for me. I put on a pair of thick-framed glasses and powdered my face unevenly, dulling my features. The woman in the reflection was no longer Claire. She was someone else. Justin parked the car 2 blocks from the Foundation's corporate building. I got out, pushing a cart with buckets, brooms, and mops, blending in with the rest of the cleaning staff entering through the service door. The guard barely looked at us. He didn't even lift his head to check our faces. Those of us at the bottom are invisible. I passed through security without a problem with the cloned keycard Justin had prepared from a careless employee's original. I took the service elevator up to the 12th floor, where Marcus's office was. The hallway was carpeted, silent and cold. I pushed the cart to the double doors with the sign, Director of Operations. I swiped the card through the reader. The light turned green, and the lock clicked. I went in. The office was spacious and elegant, with dark wood furniture and a large window overlooking part of the city. On the wall behind the desk hung a photograph of us. Marcus, Ethan, and me, smiling in a park. I wanted to rip it off the wall. Marcus hadn't hung that photo out of love, but as part of his mask as an exemplary family man. I knew, because I had accidentally seen it once, that behind an abstract painting on another wall, there was a safe. I carefully removed the painting, and there was the digital panel. I swallowed hard. The code was Ethan's birth date. The irony made my stomach turn. I keyed in 0317, and the green light came on. I opened the safe, expecting to find the vial of poison. It wasn't there. There were stacks of cash, property documents in Marcus's name, passports with various stamps, papers transferring Foundation land to private accounts. It was pure corruption, but it still didn't prove the murder. I took pictures with the small camera hidden in one of my buttons, one by one, leaving nothing unrecorded. Then I heard laughter and footsteps approaching down the hall. Panic surged through me like a heat wave. I closed the safe, put the painting back, a little crooked in my haste, and hid behind a large sofa near the desk, pretending to clean the baseboard. The door opened. Marcus and a well-dressed young woman with a tight dress and high heels walked in. It was Brenda, his secretary, whom I had always seen a little too close to him. They didn't notice me, protected by the height of the sofa's back and the shadow of a filing cabinet. What I heard next burned me from the inside. Marcus didn't seem like a grieving man. He was laughing with Brenda as he poured whiskey into 2 glasses. She sat flirtatiously on the edge of the desk and caressed his arm. They talked about Ethan's death as if they were discussing the successful closing of a business deal. Brenda told him his performance at the funeral had been perfect, that even Mr. Sterling had been impressed with his fatherly grief. Marcus gloated, saying that getting rid of that sickly child had been the best thing for his future. He called him a burden, a source of expenses that prevented the inheritance money from flowing into his hands. I felt my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to jump out and beat them to a pulp, but I knew I would lose. Instead, I activated the small microphone recorder I had in my pants pocket and let every word of that conversation be recorded. They talked about a trip to Europe they planned to take when things calmed down and the millions arrived in his account. They mocked me, my desperate escape. Marcus said they would soon find my body dumped somewhere, that everyone would think I had gone crazy with grief. He called me weak, useless without him. And there's nothing they can prove, he added, kissing Brenda's temple. I had the vial of poison incinerated with the medical waste this morning, not a trace left. That sentence was a gut punch. The vial, our hope, was gone. But we had obtained something just as powerful, an arrogant admission, a confession from someone who believed they had already won. When they finally left for lunch, I waited several minutes in my hiding spot to be sure. Before I left, I took the small toy car Ethan used to carry in his backpack from my pocket, something I had saved from the night before, and left it in the middle of the desk, right on top of Marcus's neat files, so he would know his past was coming for him. I returned to the apartment with Justin, and we listened to the recording together. Justin had to go out onto the balcony to smoke to keep from exploding. He knew the audio was devastating, but it was still the result of an illegal recording, and they could try to have it thrown out in court. We needed them to sink themselves in public, to betray each other in front of witnesses, cameras, and microphones. The most effective way to make a criminal make mistakes is to make them afraid. And we knew that Marcus, as cold as he was, had a weakness, a terror of the supernatural, of karma, of punishment from things he couldn't control. Years ago, when we were newlyweds, he had confessed to me that he was terrified of ghost stories, that he was obsessed with the idea that bad deeds would come back multiplied. He had tried to drown that fear in cynicism and money, but it was still there. Justin had managed to hack our house's smart home system: lights, cameras, audio, air conditioning, everything Marcus had installed to feel secure, we would use to drive him insane. That very night, we began the harassment. From the laptop screen, we watched on the living room camera as he poured himself drink after drink, nervously playing with the toy car someone had left on his office desk. At midnight, Justin made the living room lights flicker. Marcus got up, confused, and went to check the switches. When he seemed to calm down, he went up to the bedroom. We lowered the air conditioning to 60 degrees. We saw him, uncovered, shivering in bed. Then, through the ceiling speakers, we played a soft laugh from Ethan, very faint, mixed with the white noise of the fan. Marcus sat up abruptly, his eyes wide, searching for the source of the sound. He asked aloud who was there. We cut the audio. We repeated the game over the following nights, gradually increasing the intensity. We never let him sleep for more than a short while at a time. On the third day, while he was showering, we filled the bathroom with the recording of Ethan's moans when his stomach hurt, that fragment that had also been on the small recorder. The echo on the tiles made it sound ghostly. Marcus stumbled out of the bathroom, slipping, clinging to furniture, soaked and with a face as white as marble. He started screaming for it to leave him alone, that this wasn't possible. Blaming Brenda was his next step. He started calling her nervously, accusing her of playing cruel jokes. Mistrust began to grow between them. The culmination of our plan coincided with the Foundation's gala, to be held at a luxury hotel. Mr. Sterling was to give a speech, and Marcus was to receive an award as an exemplary father for continuing to support the institution despite his tragedy. The title of the award turned my stomach. Justin found a breach in the hotel's Wi-Fi network and accessed the projection and sound system. They had planned an emotional video with photos of Ethan. We prepared a very different one, a compilation of their own rottenness. The night of the event, Justin and I watched everything from a van parked in the lot with several screens connected to the hotel's cameras. We saw Marcus enter with Mr. Sterling. Marcus looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes, hunched over, constantly looking over his shoulder as if he feared seeing a ghost. Brenda was there too, beautiful but vexed, subjected to his mood swings. As Marcus went on stage to receive the award, the audience applauded. He took the microphone and began to talk about how much he missed his son, in the same broken tone he had rehearsed. I gave Justin the signal. The giant screen behind Marcus, which was supposed to show an animation of Ethan's smiling face, filled with white noise and a high-pitched screech filled the speakers. Then, the image changed to a deep red background, and enormous letters appeared as if written in blood. "I know what you did." The room fell completely silent. Marcus turned around, pale as a corpse. At that moment, we played the recording of his conversation with Brenda through the speakers, the one where he called Ethan a sickly child and bragged about destroying the poison vial. The attendees gasped. There were exclamations, chairs scraping, indignant murmurs. Brenda stood up, staggering, on the verge of fainting. Mr. Sterling stood up, red with rage and shame. Marcus tried to grab the microphone, shouting that it was all a setup, that they were slandering him. But his voice was drowned out by a wave of reproaches and camera flashes. The worst for him came when he saw Mr. Sterling whisper something to the head of security. He understood in an instant that they planned to use him as a scapegoat, to leave him alone to face public opinion to save the Foundation's image. "You!" Marcus shouted from the stage, pointing at Sterling. "It was you who planned everything. The inheritance, the split of the money, the poison. If I go down, you go down with me." That accusation, captured by cell phones and television cameras, would be impossible to erase. The gala descended into chaos. Marcus escaped through a service exit, pursued by journalists. Sterling tried to control the situation, but the scandal had already erupted on social media. The video went viral in hours. However, we knew it wasn't enough. Lawyers could claim stress, delirium, a digital fabrication. We needed a clearer final scene, with them describing their crimes themselves while someone listened officially. That night, we returned to the apartment without celebrating. We knew a wounded animal is a dangerous animal. Marcus was now a social pariah, but still free. Sterling was cornered, but with resources. The next phase of the plan was to pit the two against each other, to make them believe the other was betraying them. Justin prepared 2 untraceable burner phones. On one, we pretended to be Marcus and wrote to Sterling, "I have signed copies of all the asset transfer papers. If you don't help me get out of the city tonight and give me my share, they go to the DA tomorrow. Meet me at the old Foundation warehouse at the port at 2 a.m., alone, or we sink together." We knew Sterling was paranoid and wouldn't dare ignore that threat. On the other phone, we pretended to be an emissary from Sterling and sent a message to Marcus. "Mr. Sterling wants to fix this. He's arranged for a boat to get you out of the country tonight. He wants you to bring all the documents and proof you have to destroy them. He's waiting for you at 2 a.m. at the old Foundation warehouse at the port. The police are already moving. It's now or never. Don't be late." Marcus, desperate, without allies, and convinced the whole world was after him, would see that message as his last lifeline. At 2 a.m, under a ferocious rain, Justin and I were already inside the warehouse, on a metal mezzanine on the 2nd floor with a perfect view of the main space. It was a large abandoned building near the pier, smelling of rust and stale sea air. Justin had placed hidden cameras and microphones connected to a secure server that a contact of his in the Major Crimes Unit would also have access to. This time, the police were aware. They knew 2 dangerous men were meeting there to talk about dirty money. They just had to wait for them to say enough and then move in. A black sedan arrived first. We saw Sterling get out with a briefcase and 2 bodyguards. He left them outside, telling them to wait. He entered the warehouse with his right hand inside his jacket. It wasn't hard to imagine he was holding a gun. His face was stone, tensed with rage and fear. Minutes later, the door creaked again. Marcus entered from the darkness. His shirt was wrinkled, his gaze lost. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 days. He walked toward Sterling with a mix of hope and hatred. "Where's the boat?" he asked in a broken voice. "You said you'd get me out of here." Sterling let out a dry laugh. "A boat? You really think after what you did at the hotel I'm going to help you escape? You humiliated me in front of everyone. You're a liability." Marcus looked at him in disbelief. "But you sent me a message. You said—" "I didn't send you anything," Sterling interrupted. "The only message I got was yours, threatening me with the documents. Did you bring them? Give them to me, and maybe I'll consider letting them find your body in one piece, not scattered in bags." Marcus's confusion turned to fury. He realized someone else was pulling the strings, but his hatred for Sterling was stronger than his survival instinct. "So you're going to kill me like we killed Ethan?" he spat. "Go ahead. But remember, you're just as responsible as I am. You got me the poison. You told me to increase the dose. You did it to cover your gambling debts." "Don't you dare point the finger at me," Sterling roared. "You were the father. You put the poison in his mouth every night. I just told you to solve the inheritance problem." "Don't play the saint, you old hypocrite," Marcus shouted. "We're the same scum." Every word was being recorded by the microphones and broadcast live to Justin's contact at the police department. There was no room for interpretation. There they were, admitting their involvement in the murder of a child and the embezzlement of funds. Suddenly, Sterling pulled out his gun and pointed it at Marcus's head. "It's over. Goodbye, you useless fool." Before he could shoot, police sirens shattered the night's silence. Red and blue lights filtered through the warehouse cracks. A voice on a megaphone ordered them to drop their weapons and surrender. Sterling started, looking toward the entrance. Marcus took advantage of that distraction to lunge at him. They both rolled on the ground. The gun flew into a corner, out of both of their reaches. From our hiding spot, we watched the brutal fight. Marcus, younger and stronger, punched Sterling again and again until he was unconscious. But he had no intention of surrendering. He stood up, staggering, and looked around for an exit. His eyes lifted toward the mezzanine where we were. A glint from the camera lens gave us away. Our eyes met. For the first time since I fled the house, Marcus saw me. My blue work scarf had shifted, revealing my face. His features twisted into a mask of absolute hatred. "Claire!" he roared, finally recognizing the ghost that had been haunting him. Crazed, he charged up the stairs, ignoring the shouts of the police who were already entering through another door. Justin grabbed my arm. "Run!" he said. "Through the roof door." We scrambled onto the warehouse roof under the torrential rain. The wind almost knocked us over. From there, we could see the pier and some patrol cars below. On the other side of the building was a metal fire escape that led down to a dock. We headed for it, but the roof door was kicked open. Marcus appeared with a metal rod in his hand, bleeding from his head, his eyes wild. Justin stepped between us, trying to stop him. Marcus dealt him a brutal blow on the arm with the rod. I heard a horrible crack. Justin fell to the ground, screaming in pain, clutching his dangling arm. I ran to him, but Marcus grabbed me by my scarf and yanked me back. I felt a searing pain in my scalp. He dragged me to the edge of the roof, using me as a shield when he saw several police officers trying to climb up from the other side. "One more step and I'll throw her off," he shouted, pressing the rod against my neck. The officers stopped. The rain soaked us all. I struggled to breathe, feeling the cold metal on my throat, but I wasn't afraid like before. I was done. Marcus forced me down the fire escape with him. We reached an old SUV parked between containers, surely stolen. He shoved me into the passenger seat, tied my hands to the overhead handle with his own tie, and got behind the wheel. He took off like a madman, crashing through the fence and onto the avenue with several patrol cars in pursuit. The police cars followed us, sirens wailing. Marcus drove as if he valued neither his life nor mine. He ran red lights, sideswiped other cars' mirrors, and hit puddles that made us skid dangerously. I slammed my shoulder against the door, trying to get free, but the tie was too tight. "You're not getting away," I said, my voice hoarse. "You're not." "Shut up," he muttered. "I'm not going back to being poor. I'm not going to rot in prison. We'll go far away. Do you understand, Claire? Far away." He took an elevated highway that was under construction. The ground was slippery from the rain, and the road narrowed due to concrete barriers. Ahead, we could see flashing lights from patrol cars blocking our path. Marcus yanked the wheel sharply to avoid the barricade, but the car lost traction. The world spun. The vehicle skidded, hit the retaining wall sideways, and crashed. The airbags deployed. I felt a sharp impact on my head and a burning pain in my temple. Dazed, I could see Marcus beside me, bleeding from his nose, his leg trapped in the wreckage of the dashboard. Still, he kept moving. He forced the door open and dragged me out, holding me by the wrists. Outside, the rain continued to fall mercilessly. He pulled me to the edge of the viaduct, where only a few steps separated us from the drop. Below, the dark current of an urban river roared. Several patrol cars surrounded the vehicle, aiming their weapons at us. Marcus pressed a shard of broken glass to my neck, right over my carotid artery. I felt the sharp point cut my skin, and a warm trickle of blood ran down my collarbone. The police shouted at him to calm down, to let me go. A negotiator spoke through a megaphone, trying to buy time. Marcus, delirious, demanded a helicopter, money, a clear route. It was absurd. He knew there was no way out, but he clung to that fantasy like a drowning man to a branch. I could hear his ragged breathing right behind me, the glass pressing against my throat. And yet, in that moment, my mind filled with a strange serenity. I stopped shaking. I saw his reflection in a puddle. The man I had loved was unrecognizable, consumed by greed and fear. I thought of Ethan, of his small body in the coffin, of Ms. Evans falling from the 3rd floor of the school. They hadn't had a choice. I still did. I glanced down at his feet. Marcus's right leg was visibly injured. The torn fabric of his pants revealed deep wounds, blood mixed with dirty water. That was his weak point. I gathered all the strength I had left. I took a deep breath, not caring that the glass cut a little deeper. I suddenly whipped my head back and bit the forearm holding the glass with all my accumulated rage. I sank my teeth into his flesh until I tasted blood. Marcus let out a piercing scream. As a reflex, he loosened his grip, and the glass slipped from his fingers. Without wasting a second, I lifted my leg and kicked him with all my might in his injured knee. There was a horrible snap. Marcus's scream was even sharper than before, an almost inhuman howl. His body lost balance, and he fell sideways onto the wet pavement, writhing in pain. I jumped back, stumbling, but now out of his grasp. The police seized the opportunity. Several officers ran toward us and pulled me away, getting me away from the edge of the bridge. Others swarmed Marcus, who was kicking and struggling, trying to grab anything. One of the officers had to shoot him in the other leg when he tried to snatch his weapon. Everything became a blur. Voices, lights, hands. They sat me on the ground, wrapped me in a thermal blanket. A paramedic pressed gauze to the wound on my neck. I didn't say anything. I just watched as they lifted Marcus onto a stretcher, handcuffed, bleeding, disfigured. As he passed by me, our eyes met again. There was no arrogance, no superiority, no hatred, just pure fear. Maybe for the first time he understood that it was all over. Justin appeared shortly after, his arm in a sling, his face bruised. He made his way over and put his good arm around me. In that moment, I finally allowed myself to cry, but my tears were no longer just of pain. They were also of relief. The next day, the news detailed the web of corruption and murder involving Marcus and Mr. Sterling. Clips of the recordings, images of the gala scandal, and photos of them both in handcuffs were leaked. Public opinion turned against them. The district attorney's office took over the case. Bank accounts were frozen, their assets seized. However, legal punishment was only part of the reckoning. Life, or fate, took care of the rest. At the prison hospital where Marcus was admitted, doctors discovered that the leg shattered in the accident had become severely infected. The combination of glass, mud, and asphalt debris had introduced bacteria into his bloodstream. Within hours, the tissue began to necrotize. To save his life, they had no choice but to amputate his right leg above the knee. Waking up from anesthesia, Marcus discovered he would never walk the same way again. He cried, screamed, begged for them to give back what he had lost. It was a brutal irony. The man who had destroyed his own son's body, damaging his organs with poison, now saw his own body mutilated. In that hospital bed, bound for a wheelchair, the same person who believed himself invincible, who looked down on the weak, was now forever what he despised most. Mr. Sterling did not escape unscathed either. During his first formal statement at the DA's office, the stress caused his blood pressure to skyrocket. He suffered a massive stroke. He survived, but half of his body was left paralyzed. The man who had commanded stages with moving speeches, who manipulated politicians and businessmen with his glib tongue, was reduced to uttering unintelligible sounds, drooling, confined to a bed in the prison infirmary. His assets were confiscated. His family disowned him out of shame. He became dependent on the hands of others, even to eat and use the bathroom. It was the total ruin of his pride. Brenda, Marcus's secretary and lover, tried to flee. She was arrested at the airport trying to leave the country with jewelry and cash. In front of investigators, she betrayed Marcus without a second thought, handing over records of transfers and incriminating emails. She thought this would reduce her sentence. But she couldn't escape responsibility for collaborating in the cover-up and benefiting from the money. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison. In jail, far from expensive suits and luxury hotels, her beauty ceased to be a privilege and became a target of envy and aggression. Justin and I followed the news with a mixture of satisfied anger and exhaustion. We never celebrated their suffering, but we didn't feel sorry for them either. Nothing that happened to them came close to the pain of a child poisoned by his own father, or the terror of a teacher thrown from a third floor for telling the truth. But at least they were no longer untouchable. One day, I was called to the prison hospital to expand on my testimony. As I walked down the guarded hallway, I saw Marcus through a small window, sitting in a wheelchair. He was a mere shadow of the man he once was, thinner, older, with a vacant stare. When he realized I was there, he slowly turned his head. Our gazes met one last time. He began to cry silently. His lips moved, trying to form words I couldn't hear. Apologies, perhaps. Tears that came far too late. For the first time, I didn't feel hatred, just a serene emptiness, an unbreakable distance. I looked at him for a few seconds, long enough for him to understand that I was still standing, that I had survived everything he tried to destroy. Then I turned and walked away. I had nothing more to say to him. 6 months passed since that stormy night on the viaduct. Time, though slow, began to heal the wounds. The scars remained, but they no longer bled. One clear morning, I looked at myself in the mirror of my new home, smaller and simpler than the last, but filled with peace. I put on a soft cream-colored scarf and smoothed the fabric with firm hands. The woman in the mirror was no longer the mother who could barely stand at her son's funeral. She was someone hardened by tragedy, yes, but also risen above it. Behind me in the reflection, I saw Justin walk by with a stack of papers, cracking a silly joke to lighten the mood. That day, the final sentence would be read. In the courtroom, packed with journalists, representatives from children's associations, and onlookers, the atmosphere was thick. I sat in the front row. Justin, in a suit with his arm fully recovered, sat next to me and took my hand. Then the judges entered, and the murmurs ceased. 2 officers pushed Marcus's wheelchair to the defendant's dock. He kept his head down. The adjacent bench was empty. Mr. Sterling's lawyer represented him, as the old man could no longer be moved. Further away in another chair, a pale Brenda trembled. The prosecutor gave a firm summary of all the charges: aggravated murder of a minor, murder of a key witness, corruption, money laundering. The presiding judge, a middle-aged woman with stern eyes, began to read the verdict. The courtroom fell into a reverent silence. Her words, though formal, had the weight of a stone thrown into water. She declared Marcus and Sterling guilty without leniency, emphasizing the cruelty and premeditation of their actions, and handed down the maximum penalty: death. There were sighs, exclamations, a barely contained "thank God" from the back of the room. Marcus began to shake. He broke down into an ugly, desperate sob that moved no one. Mr. Sterling was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge noted that although he was ill, his moral and legal responsibility was absolute. His broken body would spend the rest of its years in a prison bed. The court gave Brenda 20 years. When the judge struck the gavel 3 times, I felt something inside me finally close. The legal chapter was over. Leaving the courthouse, the fresh street air tasted different. It wasn't absolute freedom, because nothing would bring Ethan back, but it was a first step toward a life where my son was not just a victim, but also the seed of something good. All the money involved in my father's inheritance and in Marcus and Sterling's schemes was recovered after a long legal process, in which Justin worked tirelessly. The state intended to keep a large portion, but we managed to prove it was Ethan's estate. Still, it was clear to me that I couldn't keep that money for myself. I saw it as stained with blood. I decided to turn it into something that would honor my son. We found an old building on the outskirts of the city and completely renovated it. At the entrance, we hung a colorful sign: Ethan's House, a foundation for child protection and education. I wanted that place to be a refuge for abused, mistreated, or abandoned children, those whom no one believed or listened to. A place where they could sleep without fear, study, play, and have access to counselors, teachers, and affection. I walked through the freshly painted hallways, adorned with children's drawings. In the yard, a group of kids was playing soccer, while others took turns on the swings. Their laughter echoed gently in my chest. In the main lobby, we hung a large photograph of Ethan smiling, and next to it, one of Ms. Evans. With part of the money, we would also fund the renovation of the school where she had worked, including a new library called the Evans Library, so her name would be linked to education, not tragedy. As evening fell, when the sun began to color the sky orange, Justin and I went to the cemetery. The graves of Ethan and Ms. Evans were side by side, under the shade of a dogwood tree, whose protective white blossoms leaned over them. The grass was green and well-tended, adorned with fresh flowers that anonymous people left from time to time. I knelt before Ethan's headstone, running my fingers over his name carved in the marble. This time, there was none of the old desperation in my eyes. There was nostalgia, yes, but mixed with a new peace. "It's done, my love," I whispered. "We got justice. They won't hurt anyone ever again. Your money is now helping other children stay safe. You don't have to be in pain anymore. You can play as much as you want up there." The wind gently rustled the branches of the tree, and a few white petals fell onto the grave. I closed my eyes and prayed long and deeply, offering God my gratitude, my grief, and my son's entire life. When I finished, I stood up. It was then that I saw something at the end of the gravel path. About 30 feet away, silhouetted against the golden light of sunset, was the figure of a little boy. He was wearing pajamas with the drawing of Ethan's favorite superhero, the same set I had dressed him in on his last night at home. His hair was tousled and his eyes were bright as always. He didn't look sick or tired. On the contrary, he radiated health and joy. I didn't feel fear. He was looking at me with a huge smile, so luminous it almost hurt. He raised his right hand and gave me a small wave, a goodbye, and, "I'm okay, Mom." I felt a single tear slide down my cheek. I returned the wave with a trembling hand and a smile that, for the first time in a long time, was sincere. "See you later, sweetie," I murmured. The figure of Ethan slowly faded with the setting sun until it disappeared, but the warmth it left in my chest remained. He was at peace. I could finally accept that I would never hug him again, but also that he was not suffering. I turned around. Justin was waiting a few steps behind me, not asking questions, with that silent patience he had always shown me. He held out his hand, and I took it firmly. We walked out of the cemetery side by side, leaving years of pain, fear, and guilt behind us. Ahead of me, the city was lighting up, one light at a time, as if a new curtain were opening. I had a whole life ahead of me, full of children who would need protection, stories that deserved to be heard, and wounds that perhaps I could help heal. I was no longer just the mother who lost her son, nor the betrayed wife. I was Claire, The woman who walked through the storm and remained standing. Founder of Ethan's House and a defender of children who have no voice. And for the first time in a long time, when I thought about the future, I could silently say, yes.